Alright, so hello. Today we're going to go over how to collect chick embryos. And so it's day 6.5 after incubation. So here we have our eggs. The first thing you're going to want to note is that on our eggs we've made a mark on them. And this is the side that's pointing up on the egg. And this is most likely where our embryo is going to be inside the egg. So when we're going to crack it, we're going to crack it on the bottom side of the egg. So today, in order to collect these embryos from the eggs, we have a few tools with us. We have a glass bin, and it's filled with something called Ringer solution, or today we're using DI water, but normally you'll be using Ringer solution, which is a saline-based solution, which comes in a jar like this. We also have some tools, so we have a specialized pair of scissors and forceps, and these we're going to take very good care of because they're very expensive. We also have a specialized, it's a pipette that we turned into a scoop by just using our scissor and removing a portion of the end. So this way, once the embryo is out, we'll be able to scoop it up. And we also have a petri dish filled with more ringers to transfer the cleaned embryo to. And then we have some good lighting because it's important that we see clearly what we're doing. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead. We're gonna crack this just like you'd crack an egg when you're baking. So we're just gonna, on the side opposite the marking, we're just gonna crack it a few times, and then we're gonna go low into the dish so that we're actually in the water and carefully separate it so that the embryo does not fall far into the water. So you can see the yolk starting to come out. And now if you look inside and see the red webbing, those are the blood vessels of the embryo, and you can see that dark spot in the back. It's kind of hard to see in this lighting, so we'll take off one eggshell. That can just go in the trash. Now the second one, if you look, let's rotate this for you so you can see our embryo right here and all of its blood vessels. This is a very beautiful embryo, so we're just going to gently use our pipette, the other end, to kind of scrape it out of the shell very gently so we can keep it all intact. And there's some egg white. So just detaching this, and then we can throw out the other end of the shell. So now, if you look in, you can see we have our embryo here. You can see, if we look, do you want to look from the top view? So what you see here, we have the eye is this big black ball, and then this is the brain is up here. The midbrain is the large protrusion, and then you have the neck that winds around the back, and so the neck is here, then the back, and then here we actually have this red organ inside is actually the heart. So let's try and zoom in and see if we can see it beating a little. So let's see, can you see just barely the movement right in here? If we watch, you should be able to see gentle movement. There you go. Now you can kind of see it. That's the heart beating actually, and it's still hooked up to all of its blood vessels. So there's blood flowing and it's still alive and pumping blood here. All right, so now we're gonna go over when we collect our embryo, we only want this small embryo portion. We don't want all of the egg white, egg yolk, and blood vessels. So we're gonna go ahead and take our tools. So we have our forceps and scissors, and we're just going to gently separate by cutting all the blood vessels and the membrane away. So we'll start by just cutting some of these easier to access blood vessels. I'm trying to be careful not to damage the embryo. And you'll notice that it will start to bleed out as we cut the blood vessels. That's okay, we want it to. As a result of that, you will no longer be able to see the heart beating. So that's why we saw it earlier. You'll still be able to see it for a little bit, but after long enough, there will be no more blood, and so you won't be able to visualize that heartbeat as well. So you can see we've mostly cut all the blood vessels or pulled them apart. So there's the remainder of the blood vessels, and here's our embryo. And then we still have a little egg yolk left here that needs to be separated out, so we can just kind of pull up on it and cut. And as you do it in person, it's much easier to see there, but it's just very gentle movements. So once we feel like we've gotten most of this off, so that looks better, now we're going to use our special scoop And we're just going to go in and try and separate it from all this yolk and egg white liquid. Then we're just going to use the scoop him up. We got a little bit of yolk left, and transfer him to this clean pipette dish. So let's move our lighting over so you can see him a little better. So again, you can see the eye. We have a little bit of yolk left over here that we'll need to remove. So we can just kind of tug on that. So again, this dish has some Ringer solution in it, just like our bigger bin, and so that's a saline solution, which is the right physiological concentration for the embryos to live in. Although this embryo has been separated from its blood vessels, so it won't live long, but we'll try and take a look in a second and see if we can still see a little bit of a heartbeat. Alright, so this is a combination of amniotic sac and remaining egg white egg yolk that I'm just pulling off right now, mostly amniotic sac. Alright, there we go. So most of it's off. So this is our embryo. You can see here the eye, and you've got the lens in the center. It's a slightly different color. And then up here you have the brain, that's the midbrain that's sticking out. We'll kind of spin him around so you can see more clearly. You can see some faint blood vessels, the webbing on there. Then we have our neck here, and we can see this space in here between the lower jaw or the mandible and the body, the collar of the neck right here. And as our embryo gets older, this space is going to enlarge because the neck will lengthen. And so we'll start to see a wider gap here, and that's a sign that our embryo is older. Another thing we're going to look at is the limbs. So here we have our wing, our upper limb, and then our lower limb here. And specifically what you can look for is whether or not a limb has full segmentation into like a hand region, a forearm region, and an upper arm region. And so what we can look for is you can see right here, the arm branches into there's an angle here where it comes back here, and then there's like a joint right here that allows it to transfer into a new part of the arm. So that's our elbow joint, and we see the lower wing here and the upper wing here. So that's a sign that it is an older embryo. And additionally, if we look, it's difficult because we can't show you under the microscope, but if we spin him around, we can also look at the segmentation of the hand itself, so the different digits. And what you can see is that, sorry, we're trying to focus for you. What you can see is that each individual digit is a slightly different color on inside the webbing of the hand. And so what we're looking for as a sign of a difference in stages is whether or not the digits have changed in length such that the second digit is longer. And what we can see is this second digit here in the middle does appear to be longer than the outer digits, and so that's a sign that our embryo is again older. Also, we can see a fully formed lower limb here, and we can look at the digits on the lower limb. So much more difficult to see, but that is also a way that we can stage our embryo. And this inner mass here is just remaining, I haven't fully cleaned the embryo, but it's just remaining amniotic sac and yolk connection, but that can be cleaned if we're going to look at this embryo in more detail. So the last few things that we want to look for are within the eye. You can see sometimes sclera, which are little dots around this lens area. In this embryo in particular, we can't see any at the moment, but they'll appear just in this ring around the eye. And they just look like small dots. The older your embryo is, the more clear and the greater in number those dots are. Okay. And then another thing that we can look for that, again, we're not going to be able to see just from this magnification level, is that there would be feather follicles on the back, and mainly you'd see those in the neck and upper back. But those are kind of the equivalent of human goosebumps, but they're little bumps where the feathers would start to form at a later stage in a development. So based on all of these features that we've seen, the fact that we have a developed heart and eye, the midbrain is fully formed, we have a mandible that is You can't see at this level, but we saw earlier in the video there's a little bit of a gap here, and the mandible is has formed a bit of a space with the collar here. Then also based on the fact that the forearm is divided into upper arm and a lower arm, so we have that elbow joint and we have an elongated second digit. Based on all of that, we would determine that this embryo is likely stage 29 or stage 30. That's about 6.5 days, like I said, and so those differences are based on those features that we've been looking at. So next we're going to go ahead and open up a second embryo. I'm not going to explain it as in detail, but we're just going to compare the two once I open it. And we don't know, the second embryo could be the same stage, it could be slightly more or less advanced, but we'll see. So let's go ahead, and we have a second egg here. Again, we're going to open it on the side opposite of the X. So we lower it down into the Ringer's solution, and then we open it. Oh no, this one actually doesn't have an embryo in it, so there will be no comparison. So this is what it looks like if your egg was not fertilized. It just looks like a normal kitchen egg, so the yolk is still whole here, and we have, even if we were to flip over the yolk, there's no embryo on this egg. So there will be no comparison of embryos. But now you should have learned how to properly open the egg, how to extract the embryo from the rest of the egg matter, and then how to identify different regions on your embryo and determine its stage, which you'll receive further materials about soon.